Hey, what's going on, guys? Wanted to bring some light to this post from Giovanni Incasa on X. Definitely go check out his page, but it's a really interesting thread he created, around Michael Saylor and his company MicroStrategy. So let's go ahead and dive into it here. So he said he bet his life savings that MicroStrategy will become the most valuable company in the world by 2030. Not because it holds 450,000 Bitcoin on its balance sheet, but he's saying he believes it is going to be the most profitable company, most valuable company per se, because of the CEO, Michael Saylor, and the secret formula he is pretty much utilizing for making money. So let's go ahead and dive into it here. So the famous Michael Saylor, he says, number one, never trust the CEO who hasn't been broke. Michael Saylor lost $6 billion in a day due to an accounting error. It took him 10 years to recover. This is why he's now a billionaire again. He said this loss is why he's now a billionaire again. Losing money is how you figure out how to make money. 100%. Number two, he said inflation isn't 2%. We'll play this video here in a second. But he says, but the government says it is. The U.S. recently changed their inflation calculation. The input numbers are collected manually through surveys. Inflation is different for everyone. 100% there. So let's go ahead and listen to what he has to say in this video here.
You think 2% inflation a year is good or bad? The majority would probably say, well, here it's good. The majority of economists would say 2% inflation a year is good. And of course, look at the ship next to us. What if I told you that the ship leaked 2%, right, of its volume every something, right? The ship is rotting 2% a year. That means the useful life of the ship is 50 years. Now, ironically, that's true. Like a wooden ship had a 50-year to 100-year life. 100 would be long, 50 years, not unlikely. So when we built ships out of wood, they had a useful life of about 50 years, and then they sunk, they rotted. There's nothing good about it, right? If you went to them and you said, do you think 2% inflation a year is good or bad? The majority would probably say, well, here it's good. The majority of economists would say 2% inflation a year is good. And of course, look at the ship next to us. What if I told you that the ship leaked 2%, right, of its volume every something, right? The ship is rotting 2% a year. That means the useful life of the ship is 50 years. Now, ironically, that's true. Like a wooden ship had a 50-year to 100-year life. 100 would be long, 50 years, not unlikely. So when we built ships out of wood, they had a useful life of about 50 years, and then they sunk, they rotted. There's nothing good about it, right?
Okay, so that's the end of that video. He's talking about a wooden ship rotting every 50 years, kind of pairing that with inflation. Do with that as well. But I think what he was trying to say here is Saylor says inflation is more like 15% per year. If you don't own assets or a home, your personal inflation rate is astronomically high. Once you know the real inflation rate, it changes how you invest. Absolutely. He said suddenly you need 15% per year, so most assets don't keep up with inflation. And let's see what he has to say about that.
A year to be viewed as successful as a dentist, right? I'll tell you why. Because we keep expanding the currency supply by 10%, which means the price of everything you want to buy goes up by 10%, which means you have to grow your cash flows by 10%. And that's why the Magnificent Seven generate all the returns in the S&P 500. And there are 493 companies that return nothing, zero. Right? They can't, and by the way, it's not their fault, right? We blame them. We blame the companies like we blame the workers for not working harder. It's not their fault. You cannot outwork inflation. And we're back to this issue of if the person that runs the currency or the money printer just keeps printing 20% more money or 10% more money a year, you just stop the heart, right? For example, you're a dentist.
Yeah, interesting take there. So he's saying it's closer to 10%. And, there's definitely a good argument there. He said, number 3, inflation is created by money printing. Absolutely. Governments and central banks create more money out of thin air. Saylor knows this. When there's more money in the system, prices go up. Governments can't stop printing because global debt is too high. Absolutely. I've made a video on this before talking about the M2 money supply. But yeah, I talked about this before. The money supply is just out of control. But let's see what this video has for us here.
The problem is inflation. Inflation's a phenomenon whereby a government authority prints more currency. And why do they print more currency? Because if I want to pay $1 trillion bill, I either have to tax you $1 trillion or I have to print $1 trillion of money. Turns out that it's a lot easier to print money than it is to tax people. And so it's either inflation or taxation. Throughout the history of the world, every single coinage system, every monetary system ever established collapsed because of inflation. The problem is
So interesting thing there, he said it's either inflation or taxation. And like he said, the government's found out that it's easier to do that via inflation. Last couple of tweets here, he says the financial system is broken and can't be fixed. It's why fiat currency is monopoly play money. And it's why Saylor has gone hard into digital assets. Unless you understand how money works, your wealth and time will be stolen from you. Think of it as another tax. Absolutely. think that's well said. He said, true price discovery is dead. People say my house went up 25% in 3 years. That's because they're measuring the price in a currency like USD that is increasing in supply. It makes you think you're getting rich when you're not. Yeah, I think that's another very good point as well. He said, change the denominator and your wealth goes down. Saylor says if you measure the price of your house in gold, Bitcoin, or some other metric, what becomes clear is most assets haven't risen in value since 2008. And I think that's really good. I saw, there was a chart the other day, somebody talking about, the returns of the S&P 500 versus the money supply. And it's kind of scary how correlated those are. And he said, when prices appear to go up, so does capital gains tax. If your stocks went up in USD terms, but in real terms they didn't, doesn't matter. You're still going to be writing the government a check in the form of capital gains tax. Yep, very well said. Starting from a humble beginning is a superpower. Saylor started his career working at McDonald's, never take money advice from someone flaunting wealth who hasn't worked in the real world. They're often just trust fund babies living off daddy's money there. Yeah, absolutely. There's a whole, it's hard to take perspective sometimes from very wealthy people because, their path to their wealth is differently. Obviously not everyone is in that situation, but there are a lot of instances like that. He said, real estate seems smart until you measure it against your freedom. He's not interested in real estate. All the gurus say it's great, but it's not portable. You've locked into the success of that country, and governments can mess with property tax. Absolutely. Insurance, property tax, they seem to be going up every single year, and that kind of ties you into that particular property. But let's look to see what he has to say here about this.
Most rich people in the world, they don't have their money in gold. Gold doesn't generate yield, right? Gold is a dead rock. Most rich people in the world, wealthy people, they own property. They own city blocks in London. They own warehouses and strip malls and hundreds of thousands of acres, and they own skyscrapers. And why do they own it? Because they have to convert their capital into a property asset, which the government cannot print more of. And if you took, let's look right now, since MicroStrategy entered the Bitcoin space on August 10th of 2020, here's what's happened to asset classes. Bitcoin is up 118%. I'm reading off my screen right now, but this is pretty close. The S&P index is up 30%. So Bitcoin has outperformed the S&P by a factor of 4.
Yeah, and he goes on to say, talking about comparing, MicroStrategy, they have pretty much changed their treasury allocation to Bitcoin, and that's helped them propel a significant amount. He said, free speech is a dying freedom. The financial systems let governments freeze your bank accounts and seize your assets. Saylor knows this, so he made his company bulletproof by converting its balance sheet to Bitcoin standard. Yes, that's what I was just talking about there. He says, change your mind. Saylor used to hate Bitcoin, but truly wealthy people can change their minds when they get more information. 10,000 hours of research on the topic of how money works will make you a millionaire. Absolutely. Yeah, this is a funny tweet. He said, Bitcoin days are numbered. It seems like just a matter of time before it suffers the same fate as online gambling. So this was December 9th of 2013. And then number 10, he says, use company's profits to buy Bitcoin. Saylor is a genius. He invested all of his company's money into Bitcoin, and MicroStrategy now owns $28.2 billion in Bitcoin. They just acquired, so this was just back on January 13th. MicroStrategy acquired 2,530 Bitcoin for $243 million at 95,972 per Bitcoin, and it has achieved a Bitcoin yield of 0.32% yield or year-to-date performance as of January 12th. They say they hodl 450,000 Bitcoin acquired for $28.2 billion at $62,000 per Bitcoin. Crazy. So they're definitely hoping it stays above 62 for sure. And then, I don't know how many more tweets there are here, but there's a lot of good information here. He says the glitch in the financial system, Saylor figured out if you could invest your company's money in a scarce asset or the supply decreases over time and be a public company so people can invest in your business, you create an infinite flywheel. Yeah, he's doing a lot of different things with, bonds and share dilution. He's doing a lot of different things. We'll see how things kind of shake out for that. He says investors invest into MicroStrategy to get exposure to Bitcoin without owning it. Yeah, absolutely. They're even a leveraged play too, maybe 2x. The price goes up, the increase in stock price allows Saylor to borrow more money to buy more Bitcoin. The less Bitcoin is now available because of the MicroStrategy purchases. Yeah, it almost feels like kind of the opposite of what crypto is. There's just one whale per se buying it all up. But I think that definitely adds some price stability for Bitcoin because he's not going to sell it, I don't think. He's a buy and hold and never sell, I think. But we'll see. He says MicroStrategy is currently the best investment in recent times, perhaps in history. So this is an annualized asset performance chart over 4 years. MSTR is coming in at 105%. Bitcoin's 53%. The Mag 7's 28%, S&P is 14%, real estate's 10%, gold is 7%, and bonds is negative 5%. So this is performance since August 10th of 2020. But yeah, so that's the end of the thread. Very long thread, a lot of valuable information on here for sure. Definitely go check out Giovanni's page on X. Very appreciative of this thread that he posted. Really good information in here. Several videos with Michael Saylor. And pretty much just to summarize it, he is, explaining why he put his life savings into MicroStrategy and he's betting that they will become the most valuable company in the world by 2030.